Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Squadron Leader Rob Saunders. We warmly welcome the family of Private Arthur James Pawley, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland. We'd also like to take a moment to consider and pay respects to the many professional and volunteer firefighters who are out in the thick of the bushfires, working in the most challenging and dangerous of conditions to keep people, places and our communities safe. We thank you for your commitment and service, which reflects the essence of the Australian spirit, a spirit we also showcase here in the stories at the Australian War Memorial. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story of just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. Following this evening's Roll of Honour reading of the story of Private Arthur James Pawley, his family members will lay a wreath at his photograph.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Arthur James Pawley. Arthur Pawley was born in 1893, the son of Walter James and Jane Pawley of the Melbourne suburb of Kensington. He attended Kensington Primary School and then worked as a butcher. Pawley was among the first to volunteer to join the Australian Imperial Force in late 1914. He enlisted in the 7th Australian Infantry Battalion in August, and in October sailed on the transport ship Horata, which was part of the first convoy of transport ships to take soldiers to the First World War. While the AIF had been raised with the intention of fighting in Europe, it was instead diverted to Egypt in order to take part in the invasion of the Turkish Gallipoli Peninsula. British commanders aimed to force the Ottoman Empire out of the war. By capturing Gallipoli, they hoped the open sea route to Russia to allow the transport of supplies to their ally. At dawn on the 25th of April 1915, the men of the 7th Battalion left the transport ship Galeka on boats and landed at the north end of the landing place. Here the men faced a heavy rifle fire and suffered many casualties. By the end of that day, about 1/3 of the battalion had been killed, wounded or gone missing. Pawley survived the landing and was with the 7th Battalion entrenched on the hillside. In early May, the 2nd Brigade, of which 7th Battalion was part, supported British and French troops at Cape Helles on the southern end of the peninsula. In an attempt to seize the town of Creta, the men charged across open ground but were cut down by heavy rifle and machine gun fire. The attack failed and the men of the 7th Battalion returned to their original position on the west coast of the peninsula. By this time, the unit had lost more than half of its men as casualties. To make up numbers, Pawley was appointed Lance Corporal in May, but not formally promoted. For the remainder of the month, the unit rotated in and out of trenches and reserve positions at Gallipoli. However, even in the reserve areas, the men were never out of danger. During the month, Turkish aeroplanes were spotted, some of which bombed Australian positions. In June, the unit took up a reserve position near the ridgeline known as Razorback. It continued to suffer casualties throughout the month. On the 20th of June 1915, Pawley was shot by a sniper and badly wounded. He was evacuated to the hospital ship Gascon, but died that afternoon. He was 22 years old. Arthur Pawley was buried at sea and is now commemorated at the Lone Pine Memorial on Gallipoli, alongside nearly 5,000 Australian and New Zealand servicemen who have no known grave. His older brother, Private Herbert Pawley, who also served in the First World War. He was twice wounded in action in France and returned to Australia in 1919 at the end of the war. Private Arthur Pawley is listed on the Roll of Honour among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed here today in Anzac Hall. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Arthur James Pawley, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able, I invite you all to please stand. Remove your hats for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. Tonight, our piper will play a lament, Flowers of the Forest, as you leave Anzac Hall. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.